We moved into the new house on a cool fall morning in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a 3-bedroom house with a backyard big enough for a dog, a few flower beds, and maybe, one day, a swing set for a child. Ethan and I had been married for 8 months, and this house was the beginning of everything we had ever dreamed of. A peaceful, private home just for the two of us. We had spent the entire summer searching. I remembered every phone call, every house tour, and the long nighttime conversations debating between potential and price. We chose this house for the quiet neighborhood and the soft afternoon sunlight that streamed through the living room window. The moment I stepped inside, I felt my heart settle. It wasn't a luxurious mansion, but it was a space where I believed I could breathe deeply and start an entirely new chapter. It was supposed to be that way. Just 2 days after we moved in, while I was still unpacking boxes in the office and Ethan was fiddling with a leaky hose in the yard, a silver SUV pulled up to the front. Before I could even register what was happening, the car door opened, and my mother-in-law, Linda, stepped out without bothering to knock. Behind her was Richard, my father-in-law, wearing a faded white shirt and holding a large bag of pastries. "Aren't we having a housewarming party?" Linda said as she walked in with a smile. No questions, no waiting. I hadn't even opened my mouth before she started scanning the room like she was inspecting a hotel. "Helen, these curtains look cheap, and the sofa's a bit cramped in that spot, don't you think?" I swallowed my irritation and tried to keep a polite smile. "We're still figuring things out." Richard stepped in with the bag. "Brought you two some sweets and a few tips on home maintenance. Parents have experience, you know." I glanced at Ethan, hoping he'd say something, but he just smiled softly and nodded like everything was perfectly normal. Linda sat down, crossed her legs, and looked straight at me. "So when do I get a key to the house?" I froze. "I'm sorry, what?" Richard chuckled like I was joking. "You know, in case of emergencies or if your mom wants to drop by and check in on you two." I turned to Ethan, hoping he'd say, "No, that's not necessary," but instead he nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense. So they can get in if something happens." I heard the wooden floor creak beneath me, or maybe it was the sound of my heart sinking. I forced a smile. "Of course. I'll get an extra one made." But in my mind, every piece of peace I had imagined about our new life was starting to crack. No one had prepared me for this, the feeling of my own home becoming a stage for others to enter freely, like they owned it. I didn't dislike my in-laws, but their presence always felt like a cold breeze through the curtains I'd just hung, making me shiver. Linda was controlling, Richard always scrutinizing, and Ethan? He was just too used to going along. I knew then that if I objected, they'd think I was selfish. But if I stayed silent, I would lose my freedom in my own home. I smiled, and in that exact moment, I knew I wasn't going to let this slide. Not because I wanted conflict, but because I had waited too long for a home, and I wouldn't let anyone invade it, no matter who they were. That evening, after my in-laws left from their surprise visit that lasted over 3 hours, I sat on the couch in the living room, staring at the warm yellow light casting on the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Ethan was in the kitchen washing the glasses Linda had deliberately left behind, like a subtle display of control. The house still smelled heavily of rose perfume she'd sprayed everywhere, claiming it freshened the air. I stayed silent for a while until the water stopped running and Ethan came to sit across from me. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice light as if nothing had just happened. I looked him straight in the eye. "You gave them a key, didn't you?" He hesitated for a moment, then exhaled like he'd been caught. "Yeah, but it's just so they can come in if there's an emergency. No one wants their parents stuck outside if they need help." I clenched my hands, keeping my voice from shaking. "An emergency like inspecting the curtains? Or evaluating how I arranged the living room?" Ethan frowned. "Helen, you're overreacting. They're my parents, they just care, that's all." "Care?" I let out a laugh, sharp and cold. "They walked in without knocking, criticized everything, and asked for a key like this was their vacation home. I don't think they care about anything but control." Ethan didn't reply. He stared at the floor like he was weighing something even he wasn't sure about. I stood up, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door. Not harshly, not angrily, just firmly. I needed space to think, and I knew that if I didn't do something, this wouldn't stop. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. Ethan was still asleep. I made coffee, grabbed my notebook and started writing. Not a journal, but a plan. I didn't know exactly what I'd do, but I knew one thing. I needed to take back control of my home. Quietly, cleverly, and undeniably. That afternoon I stopped by the locksmith near our neighborhood. The locksmith, Marcus, a man in his 40s with calloused hands and a genuine smile, helped me choose a secondary lock that could be secured from the inside, one that no old key could open. "I want to install this on the inside of the front door," I said, "just for extra safety in case I'm home alone." Marcus nodded. "This one's used in hotels a lot, simple, sturdy, and effective." That night I installed the new lock while Ethan was on the phone with his best friend. He had no idea. And I didn't need him to know, at least not yet. The next day I acted like everything was normal, made breakfast, asked Ethan about work, smiled at his stories. I even texted Linda, thanking her for the pastries and inviting her over again that weekend. I knew I was playing the long game, and to win I needed them to lower their guard. Ethan might think I had accepted things, but in reality I was preparing for a perfect counter, one they'd never see coming. 4 days later, while I was working on my laptop in the living room, my phone buzzed with a notification from the camera app. Motion detected in the living room. I frowned. Ethan was at the office, I was clearly home. I opened the camera. The image appeared, Linda and Richard rummaging through the kitchen cabinets. I froze for a few seconds, then exhaled slowly. They came into my house, in broad daylight, while I'm here, and didn't even know, I muttered, equal parts angry and strangely relieved, because what I feared had happened, and now I had proof. I didn't call Ethan, I didn't call anyone. I quietly walked downstairs, opened the app, and activated the safety mode on the new lock. The secondary lock engaged, and from the bedroom, I began documenting everything. I didn't need to shout, silence would be the strongest protest, and this time I wouldn't let anyone cross the line again. I sat in the car, parked 5 blocks from the house, holding a cup of cold coffee. In my ear the familiar sound chimed from my phone. A motion alert from the living room camera. 10:45 a.m. on a Tuesday. Linda walked in first, carrying her usual beige tote, the kind she always used to bring over leftover food without ever asking if we wanted it. Richard followed, taking off his shoes at the door like this was their home. No knocking, no heads up, and definitely no invitation. I stared at the screen, chilled as I watched them walk straight into the kitchen, opening cabinets like they were checking whether I cooked nutritious meals for their son. Linda grabbed one of my dish towels and wiped the counter, as if trying to erase traces of my private life. I nearly laughed when she pulled out the tablecloth, inspected it, and folded it the way she preferred. They had given themselves ownership of a house that wasn't theirs. I glanced at the time and pressed my lips together. Right on schedule, I had planned every minute, every detail, and the next part was about to begin. About 15 minutes after they entered, the camera showed them getting ready to leave. Richard turned the doorknob and gave it a pull. It didn't budge. He tried again, this time with more force. Linda frowned and stepped beside him. They exchanged confused looks, then looked up, spotting the secondary lock at the top. The same lock I'd had installed a few days ago, with help from a locksmith named Marcus, a sturdy hotel metal lock that could only be opened from the inside. Linda jiggled the door, Richard gave it a light shoulder push, still nothing. And then, the basement door creaked open. A tall man stepped out, broad shoulders, shaved head, wearing a faded denim shirt with a red dragon embroidered across the back. On his right arm was a hawk tattoo, his sharp eyes cutting straight through. "Well, good morning," a deep voice rumbled, laced with sarcasm. "Who are you, and what exactly are you doing in my house?" Linda's mouth fell open. Richard turned red, standing up straighter, like he was facing a police officer. I leaned back in my car seat, closing my eyes for a brief second. Perfect. That man's name was Sam? My cousin, 15 years older, a former serviceman who now ran a motorcycle repair shop in Raleigh. Sam had lived all over, didn't take kindly to being controlled, and especially disliked anyone who treated family authority as an excuse to violate boundaries. 3 days ago I had asked Sam to come to Charlotte, and that morning I handed him a fully legal short-term lease, signed, notarized, and official. For 7 days, legally, the house was Sam's. Linda stammered. Who are you? This is my son's house." Sam raised an eyebrow. "I'm the tenant. I have paperwork. You two are trespassing." Richard stepped forward. "We have a key. This is my son's home." Sam didn't flinch. "Not right now. And if you don't leave immediately, I'll call the police." I watched it all through the screen. No yelling, no chaos, no theatrics. Just confusion and defeat, slowly spreading across Linda and Richard's faces. I picked up my phone and tapped the app to turn on the camera's speaker. "Aunt Linda, Uncle Richard," I said clearly and calmly. "I hope next time, before entering someone's home, you remember to knock." Linda looked around, startled. "Helen, where are you?" "I'm watching, and I have all the evidence I need." As the words landed, Sam lifted his phone. "Ready to call the cops if you're not out in 5 minutes." Richard tugged at his wife's arm. Linda hesitated but eventually turned to leave, her eyes fixed on the camera, like she finally understood I was no longer the timid newlywed they used to dismiss. I set the phone down and started the engine. I didn't feel triumphant, just deeply relieved. Because for the first time since entering this marriage, I had reclaimed something I'd lost for too long, control over my own life. And I wasn't stopping here. I returned home just before noon, after confirming Linda and Richard were gone. Sam was still in the kitchen boiling water with the new electric kettle I bought last week. He looked up when I walked in, flashing a sly grin. "All good?" I asked, placing my purse on the table. "All good." They were a little shaken but didn't raise their voices. Sam took a sip of coffee and shrugged. "Guess they're not used to being caught off guard." I sat across from him, opened my laptop and started extracting the footage. No editing needed. Everything was crystal clear. 2 older adults entering a private home without permission, then panicking when they found someone legally living there. "This is enough to send," I said softly. Sam nodded. "Want me to pass it to a lawyer? I know someone at the state office." I shook my head. "Not yet. I want Ethan to see it first." Because even though the plan had gone perfectly, there was one thing left to do: have an honest conversation with my husband. That evening, when Ethan came home, I stayed calm. He took off his coat, walked into the kitchen, kissed my cheek as usual. But I saw the confusion in his eyes when he noticed Sam still there, sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee. Sam?" Ethan asked, hesitating. "What are you doing here?" Sam glanced at me, then stood and shook Ethan's hand. "Hey, I'm staying here for a bit, got a lease and everything." Ethan frowned. "A lease? Here?" I stepped forward and gently placed the folder on the kitchen counter. "Ethan, I rented the house to Sam for a week. Signed by the owner, notarized, fully legal." He looked at the papers, then at me, his confused gaze shifting to surprise. You did this because..." I opened my laptop and played the video. On the screen, Linda and Richard appeared. Walking into the house, rummaging through the kitchen, sitting on the couch, and panicking when the door wouldn't open. Then Sam emerged from the basement, presented the documents, and clearly stated his legal rights. Ethan stood frozen. He didn't say a word for nearly 2 minutes. Finally he whispered, "They really came in without telling anyone?" I looked him straight in the eye. They didn't just come in, they acted like this was their house. They inspected everything, rearranged my things, and acted like I didn't exist. "And you gave them the key without even asking me." He sighed, resting his head in his hand. "I didn't realize it had gotten this bad." I didn't accuse him. I just looked at him, silent. Silence was all I had left when trust had been worn away. A moment later, Ethan stood up and walked to the bedroom without saying another word. I didn't stop him. I needed him to sit with that feeling. The realization that the family he once believed loved unconditionally were the very ones willing to shatter every boundary to maintain control. The next morning, while I was eating breakfast alone, Ethan came out. His eyes were puffy from lack of sleep, but his voice was clearer than ever. "I was wrong. Not just wrong for giving them the key, wrong for not seeing what you've been going through. I kept thinking you were overreacting when I was the one who wasn't strong enough to stand up for you." I looked up at him. "I don't need you to protect me. I need you to stand with me." He nodded. "I know. And from now on, I will." We didn't say anything else, just the sound of a spoon tapping against a bowl, and the soft morning light shining through the curtain Linda once criticized. But I knew it wasn't over yet. 3 days later, I got a call from the landlord. His voice was full of surprise. "Helen, an older couple came by the office yesterday. They said they're your in-laws. They..." Asked me to cancel your lease. I gripped the phone, knuckles turning white. They even offered to pay the full remainder of the rent if I'd agree to rent to them instead. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't feel angry anymore, just a sharp, cutting coldness. Linda and Richard hadn't just crossed the line. They were trying to push us out of a life they couldn't control. I looked at Ethan. He'd heard everything. "We need to talk," he said. I nodded. "We need to decide how this boundary gets drawn, once and for all." That night, after the call with the landlord, Ethan and I sat across from each other in the living room. No lights on. Just the street lamp casting a pale, quiet glow across the room. Ethan laced his fingers together, head bowed. "I didn't think they'd go that far," he said, voice hoarse. "You were right. All along." I didn't respond right away. The words I had wanted to hear he had finally said, but the relief didn't come the way I thought it would. Instead, there was a deep sadness, because I knew that if I hadn't acted, things might have gone too far, beyond repair. "We need to change all the locks," I said calmly. "Not just the front door, the back door, the ground floor windows, and the garage too." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "I'll call the locksmith first thing tomorrow." I stood up and pulled the curtain closed. "And we need to have a clear conversation with them. No more avoiding." Ethan sighed. "You want me to come with you?" I turned around, my gaze cold. "No. This time, I'm going alone." The next morning I drove to Linda and Richard's house. A 2-story colonial with roses blooming in the front yard, but the grass was yellow and dry, like they only cared about what people could see and ignored the rest. Linda opened the door. She looked surprised to see me, but forced a pale smile. "Oh, Helen! Come in, I was just about to call you." I didn't step inside. "I won't stay long, we need to talk." Richard appeared from the living room, holding a newspaper, eyes locked on me. "I know you went to the landlord," I said directly. "I know you tried to get us kicked out of the house." Linda glanced at her husband, hesitant. "You misunderstood. I just wanted to make sure Ethan was living somewhere appropriate. I didn't think that neighborhood was safe." I let out a dry laugh. "Unsafe, or just a place you can't control?" Richard stepped forward, his voice low and sharp. "You should watch how you speak to your elders." I didn't back down. "And you should watch how you invade other people's lives." Linda reached out, pulling Richard back. "We only want what's best for Ethan." I looked her straight in the eye. "If you truly wanted what's best for him, you wouldn't be secretly sabotaging our private life." Richard scoffed. "You think you're so clever, don't you? But one day Ethan will realize you're the one who tore this family apart." I took a deep breath, staying composed. If being the reason my husband finally gets to live as part of a real family, then I'll take that blame any day. Linda's voice trembled. "Are you threatening us?" I smiled. "No. I'm here to make it clear, from now on, you're not allowed in our house without permission. No dropping by, no calls out of nowhere, and absolutely no interference. If it happens again, I won't be speaking to you. My lawyer will." I turned to leave, not waiting for a response, but just as I reached the door, Richard's voice came from behind, heavy and calculated. "You think you've won, don't you? Marriage doesn't fall apart over a house, Helen. Sooner or later, Ethan will realize all you have is stubbornness and control." I turned back, this time not with anger, but pity. "I don't need to win," I said slowly. "I just need a life where I don't have to ask permission to be at peace." I walked to my car and closed the door gently. No drama, no shouting, because the biggest things rarely need noise, just clarity and resolve. On the way home, I got a message from Ethan. "All the locks are changed, even the garage. I called someone to install an outdoor camera at the back door too. Everything's going to be okay, I promise." I looked outside, sunlight glowing softly on the pavement. I knew it wasn't over, but I also knew I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. I returned to Linda and Richard's house on a Saturday afternoon, just after the rain stopped. The pavement was still wet and the air smelled of freshly cut grass mixed with the damp scent of the bushes around the yard. I brought nothing but my phone and an unshakable will. Linda opened the door. She looked surprised to see me again, but there was no time for pleasantries. "I'm not here to visit," I said flatly. "I need answers." Richard was in the living room, feet up on the coffee table, holding a glass of iced water. He didn't bother to look at me. Just smirked. You here to complain about us talking to the landlord again? I stepped inside, standing in the center of the room like a line that couldn't be erased. No. I'm here to confirm that you really did try to get us thrown out. Linda glanced at her husband, but Richard didn't flinch. He set his glass down and slowly stood up. And what if we did, he said, eyes locked on mine. You think you can steal my son and drain everything from him? I raised an eyebrow, my voice icy. I didn't steal anyone. Ethan is a grown man who makes his own choices, but clearly that terrifies both of you, doesn't it? Linda cut in, her voice rising like she was trying to drown out reason. You don't understand, Helen. You just showed up less than 2 years ago. We're the ones who raised Ethan since he was a baby. I turned to her, my expression calm and unsettling. Yes, and that doesn't give you the right to control his life forever. Richard stepped closer, only a foot away. You think you're clever, setting us up with cameras, bringing in your cousin, showing legal documents. But you don't understand this family. I didn't move. I understand it all too well. That's why I'm here, to end your power games. I have plenty of evidence of trespassing, interference with our lease, and intruding on our private life. Linda went pale. You're threatening to sue us? I looked her in the eye. I'm offering a choice. Either stop now, or the law gets involved. The room fell silent like a storm was about to break. Richard stared at me, then suddenly let out a laugh, not joyful but cold and mocking. You think I did all that for that house? For cheap furniture or to see how you arranged the sofa? He stepped closer, pointing at me. I did it because I see what you're doing. Pulling Ethan away from us. Turning him into someone we don't even recognize. I stayed silent. He used to call me every week, Richard went on. Now what? Nothing. No check-ins, no visits. And it all started when he married you. Linda quietly sat down, her hands clasped, her eyes distant. I answered slowly. Maybe because for the first time in his life, Ethan is allowed to be himself. Richard clenched his fists. You'll regret this. I took a single step back, my voice calm and steady. If protecting my family is wrong, then I'm okay with regret. I turned to go, but before I reached the door, Linda's voice called out softly. Helen. I stopped, not turning around. Do you truly love Ethan? I turned back and looked at her. Not with anger but with certainty. I love him enough to stand here and not be afraid. Linda stared at me for a long moment, then dropped her head into her hands. I left that house not with a sense of victory but with the closure I needed. The sun had set and the last clouds were fading. But I knew, behind the silence, something had shifted, and there was no going back. After that direct confrontation at my in-laws' home, I truly hoped it would be over. I thought Linda would choose to back off, and that Richard, stubborn as he was, would finally understand that the battle for control over Ethan had come to an end. I was too naive. The first week passed with suspicious quiet. No texts, no calls, no unannounced visits. Ethan started laughing more. He even bought a patio set so we could enjoy weekend tea together. I thought he was finally starting to breathe, like he'd stepped out of a suffocating room he never realized he was trapped in. But then, on Friday night close to 11 p.m., we were watching a movie in the living room when we heard a strange rustling out front. Ethan clicked off the TV. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. He walked over to the door, gently pulling back the small curtain on the side window. It's my dad, Ethan muttered, disbelief in his voice. I rushed to his side and peeked through the slit in the curtain. Richard was standing on the front steps, holding something metallic that caught the light. In an instant I realized. It was a key. But we had changed all the locks. I held my breath, watching him insert the key into the lock, turn it, then yank hard when the door didn't move. He tried again, this time with more frustration, then slammed his hand on the door handle. Ethan stepped back, eyes wide. Call the police, I whispered, already reaching for my phone. But Richard wasn't finished. He backed off the porch and walked around the house. Ethan rushed to the back door and locked the safety bolt. We heard his footsteps crunching along the stone path on the side of the house. Seconds later, the backyard camera pinged a motion alert. The screen lit up with Richard's figure shining a flashlight into the kitchen window, like he was searching for a weak spot. I didn't hesitate. I dialed 911, my voice steady and clear. Someone is trying to break into my home. I know him. He's my father-in-law. The police arrived in under 10 minutes. They ordered Richard out of the backyard and had him place his hands on the patrol car. Linda showed up from somewhere, pale and shaking, clutching her purse. "We just wanted to talk," she told the officers. "We're family." One officer turned to Ethan. "Do you confirm they're relatives?" Ethan was silent for a few seconds. I felt his entire body tense. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, firmly, "They're my parents, but they're not allowed here. They've trespassed on our private property." Linda staggered as if she'd been slapped. Richard squinted but said nothing. "Do you want us to pursue this legally?" the officer asked. Ethan nodded. "I want them to leave, and I'm ready to file for a restraining order if necessary." I held his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. In that moment I knew Ethan had truly chosen to stand with me, not against his parents, but to protect his own life, our life. After the police left, having issued a formal warning and ordered Richard's family not to return, the house fell silent. Ethan sat in a chair, his face buried in his hands. "Why would they do that?" he whispered. "They used to be good people." I knelt in front of him, placing a hand on his knee. "Maybe they were, but now they can't accept that you're an adult who has the right to make his own choices." He looked up at me, eyes red. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I smiled. "You see it now, and I'm proud of you." At 1 a.m. I got a text from an unknown number. "You think you can keep us apart forever? You'll pay for this." I handed the phone to Ethan. He read the message, sighed, then opened the app and blocked the number. "We'll protect each other," he said firmly, "no matter what they try." I nodded, eyes still on the phone screen. Because I knew this wasn't over. But this time I had an ally, and I wasn't afraid anymore. 3 days after the incident with the police, just when I thought things had finally calmed down, a letter landed in our email inbox. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was nearly 10 pages long, sent from a law office downtown. Subject: Request to reestablish family relations and restore communication based on moral and legal obligation. I read every word, every paragraph, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. My in-laws, Richard and Linda, had hired a lawyer demanding we restore our relationship with them, claiming our refusal to communicate was causing severe emotional distress to the elderly and a violation of traditional moral values. They called our actions an extreme expression of negative influence from the wife. They called me the person who had severed their son from his family's love, and even suggested I should reconsider my role as a proper wife and daughter-in-law. I glanced at Ethan as he read the document on the screen. His face wasn't angry like I expected, it was just blank, as if he was too exhausted to feel anything anymore. "I'm the negative influence," I said softly with a bitter smile. Ethan slowly shook his head, closing his eyes for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop, pulled out a chair and began typing, each word slow, steady, and deliberate. "To Mr. Richard and Mrs. Linda. From this moment forward, we request that you refrain from contacting us through any means, phone, email, letters, or through third parties. Any further attempts will be considered harassment and may be subject to legal action. We owe you no presents, no conversation, and certainly no obedience. Please consider this your final notice. Ethan and Helen." I read that email over and over again, slower each time, not because I wanted to change anything, but because every word felt like a door finally closing, firmly, without regret. Ethan hit send. The simple sound echoed in our quiet house like a bell ringing in the distance. After that, we blocked every number, unfollowed every account, and we told our landlord that if anyone tried to harass or threaten us, he had our full permission to refuse them access and inform us immediately. But Richard and Linda didn't give up easily. They started sending handwritten letters, messy scrawls with bright red exclamation marks, even old family photos with notes like, "We used to be happy." I didn't reply. I tore them up into pieces and dropped them into the trash without hesitation. Sometimes they called from blocked numbers. When that didn't work, they switched to anonymous email accounts. Fake names, cryptic messages like, "A mother always waits for her son to return," or "Family is forever, little boy." The last time I saw anything from them was on Christmas Eve. A card left in the mailbox. No sender name, no stamp. The front showed 2 reindeer running through snow. Inside, just one handwritten line. "We forgive you. Come home." I sat in the car, card still in hand, looking through the windshield toward the small house with warm lights glowing inside. Ethan was standing on the porch, hands in his coat pockets, watching the gentle fall of the season's first snow. I stepped out and handed him the card. He skimmed it and nodded. "They don't get it," he said quietly. "Forgiveness is for the one who did wrong, not something you use as bait to pull someone back in." I held his hand tightly, silently. Nothing more needed to be said. We went back inside, closed the door, and let the winter wind shut out everything else. Maybe they'd try to reach out again. Maybe there would be more accusations, more emotional tricks. But this time the door wasn't just locked with a metal bolt. It was locked with courage. With the decision not to live in fear. And with a love finally truly free. Spring arrived slower than usual, but in our hearts, peace had come long before. Since sending that final email and cutting off all contact, Richard and Linda tried a few last stunts. An anonymous bouquet left on the porch for Ethan's birthday, a call from a strange number, where all I heard was a sigh and a hurried hang-up, a message from an old friend asking how Ethan was doing after years of no contact. But none of it reached us anymore. We had learned not to respond. What unsettled them wasn't our anger, it was our silence. When there was no one on the other end to manipulate, control, or pressure, the power they once held meant nothing. Ethan began to change in ways I hadn't expected. He started writing again, something he gave up years ago after his father told him writing won't feed a family. He refurbished the small office in our garage, built shelves, hung up a whiteboard, and filled it with new ideas. He even started submitting manuscripts to local publishers. And one week he got an email from an editor saying they wanted to see more. I didn't say much, I just stood behind him as he read it, my hand resting gently on his shoulder. He looked up at me, and his eyes no longer carried the heaviness of the past few months. Instead, they lit up the way they had the day we first met. It was the look of someone slowly becoming themselves again. One Sunday afternoon, as we sat on the porch drinking lemonade, Ethan looked out at the quiet street and said softly, "I don't flinch when the doorbell rings anymore." I looked up at him and smiled. "And you don't check your phone every morning to see if anyone called in the middle of the night?" He nodded. "I used to think I'd never escape them. That family was something you could never cut off, no matter how much it hurt." Didn't argue. I used to believe that too. We both grew up being taught that patience was love, that forgiveness had no conditions, and that blood ties couldn't be turned away from. But it turns out sometimes loving yourself means saying goodbye to what's toxic. A month later, we decided to host a small backyard gathering with a few close friends. Sam, the one who once scared my in-laws half to death, came too, bringing his signature barbecue and a bottle of Only for the Brave hot sauce. As laughter echoed through the yard, Ethan stood beside me, looked around, and whispered, "For the first time in years, this feels like home." I turned to him and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "And it's ours. No one gets in unless they're invited." Before leaving, Sam clapped Ethan on the back and winked. "You know, sometimes cutting ties is the kindest thing you can do, for both sides. At least it gives the other person a chance to look at themselves, if they're brave enough." Ethan paused, then nodded. "And if they can't, at least we still have the rest of our life ahead." We cleaned up the backyard as dusk fell, soft yellow string lights blinking along the fence. I looked at our home no longer just a shelter but a safe haven. A place with no uninvited footsteps, no lingering guilt, no watchful eyes. The story between me and Richard, between Ethan and his parents, may never have a fairy tale ending. But that's okay. Because not all happy endings are reunions. Sometimes the happiest ending is having the courage to walk away. And for the first time in a long, hard journey, I can finally say with a quiet heart, we are truly free. From my own story, I've realized that not every relationship labeled family deserves to stay. There are boundaries that once crossed too many times make cutting ties not cruel but necessary to stay true to yourself. Real love doesn't control or manipulate, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to endure, it's to walk away and choose peace. Because everyone deserves a home that is truly their own. What do you think about Helen's story and how she protected her happiness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. and don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss the next heartfelt family story.